All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our fun Herbs of Avalon little priestess chat today, which is what plant screams Avalon the most? And some of you who are watching this might have already studied with me or already have heard me talk about some of these plants in the past, but I thought it would still be fun to get together. I wanted to, offer this up out to the community as a fun little teaser. As some of you know, right now we are in, today is February 20th, 2026, and we are in registration week for my Herbs of Avalon 9-month course, which is kicking off now and wraps up not until, let's see, the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Oh, no, before Thanksgiving. So not until late November. So we'll have lots and lots of time this year to hang out and be in Avalon. What we're going to do today is we're going to chat a little bit about, is it rose? Is it apple? What is it? We're going to talk about Hawthorn today. But we're going to also talk about rose a little bit. I'm not going to lie. But the other day I went live and I was asking those who had tuned in, what do you guys think? I asked people to comment and say, like, what do you think is the plant that screams Avalon the most, besides the obvious, which would be the apple tree? So what we talked a little bit about is the fact that the word Avalon was originally from the Welsh. I'm going to type in the chat, Avalon, apple, isle. Yeah, so the word aphal, maybe they said it a little differently, just meant apple in Welsh, probably an older form of Welsh than what they speak today. Yes, it's not a dead language. Yes, there are folks who still speak Welsh, by the way, which is a very cool but very difficult language as far as I'm concerned. But at any rate, so the apple is a member of the rose family, which is spelled Rosaceae. Rose family. If I can type properly. There we go. And as you might imagine, the rose is also part of that family. So when I asked the other day, what plant do you think screams Avalon and Priestess of Avalon? I know Miranda answered with rose. Saba, I'm pretty sure you would agree because I know you are a big rose person. And I bet a lot of other folks would agree with that as well. And I actually don't disagree. I think that personally, I would award a tie to the rose and the hawthorn. And I'll probably explain why if we have time. But in a nutshell, I think that you could think of the rose and the hawthorn as expressions in nature of the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and yet they both contain aspects of both. And we're not talking about human genders, by the way, just more of energetic expressions of ways that the divine comes together in alchemy through nature and through various examples in nature on the sacred sites. So a lot of people know about the red and white spring of Avalon, which are, we're talking about, Glastonbury as modern day Avalon, but of course there are many other sort of places where the veil is thin and portals to Avalon around the world. If we have time, we'll talk about that, but we might not. So most people know about the red and white spring, these two sacred wells, natural springs that occur in modern day Glastonbury. But of course, they are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. The red spring is the one that has traces of iron and it stains the rocks a reddish brown color. And that is found in the Chalice Well Gardens, which I'm using as my background. This was the Chalice Well at autumn equinox in 2016, which was when my husband and I traveled there for our honeymoon. So this is my photo. I have not stolen it. The white spring can be a bit more elusive, although now it's a lot more, I would say, well known and kind of easy to find if you're walking around Glastonbury than it has been in prior decades. And then, of course, the white spring contains calcium in its waters and stains stone and rock like with a whitish film. It's often thought that the red and white spring represent the feminine and the masculine. This red and white idea that is not unique to the Celts, the pre-Christian Celts, as far as the red and white representing sort of matter and spirit, or the earth and the heavens. And then in some cases, depending on school of thought, it's thought that the red is the feminine, and the white is the masculine energy. And the idea of the alchemy of Avalon, which actually didn't know about this when I named my business Alchemy of Avalon years and years ago, but now I like it even more because of this, is that we do know that long before these man-made structures of the Chalice Well Gardens and the street that runs in between now, between the red and white spring, and of course the well house that contains the white spring nowadays, none of that was there for the longest time. And the two springs used to meet in a center pool. And there was so much meaning in that meeting, right? So now let's go back to the plants, because that's why we're here, right? So if we look at the red rose, of course there are white roses too, but if we think of the red rose and the white flowers of the hawthorn tree, we can kind of see that as that alchemy of Avalon, or that masculine or feminine and masculine. But of course, again, we just said, roses can be white as well, but then also we have the white flowers on the hawthorn, but then it has red berries as we get to the end of the summer and early fall. So the red and white are represented in both plants or shrubs or trees, depending on, yeah. So it's really, really beautiful and fascinating, especially when we also consider, of course, that the apples that grow all around Avalon are red apples with, of course, white flesh. I won't get into the theories around the black well of Avalon and the black seeds of the apple, but there is a lot to that as well, which we do talk about in my class. So that is why, my friends, I would actually probably say I would give rose and hawthorn a tie for the plant that screams Avalon the most. But for today, since I think rose is probably more familiar to the average person than hawthorn, we're going to talk about hawthorn. I also am a little bit biased towards hawthorn because it is very strongly associated with the fae and with liminality, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And also because if you look at the Celtic tree astrology calendar, I am a hawthorn. My birthday falls under the time period of hawthorn. So yeah, I'm a little bit biased. But what I'm going to do is share my screen, and I'm going to pull up the handout that I have posted in the chat. So let me just give me one moment to get that ready. Perfect. And a lot of this Hawthorn information, well, I think just about all of it has been taken from my class materials, but we go, further into it in the course. But I would like to start off with just a little bit of story time for a moment, because it's important to understand, especially if you're new to all of this, why are we even connecting herbalism or herbcraft, as some would call it, with Avalon in general? So some people might know a little bit about Avalon as a place of mystery and magic, and there were priestesses, and maybe King Arthur went there when he died. But it was more than that, whether it was real or not. We have a deep memory of Avalon as a place of healing. So why herbcraft is a cornerstone of the path of Avalon. Okay, so gather round, here's your tea, cozy up. The Avalon of legend, mythical isle of apples, and home to priestesses of the goddess, is known perhaps chiefly as a place of wondrous healing. After all, in King Arthur's last hours, it was there that he chose to be taken with his sister Morgana at his side. And sidebar, Morgan Le Fay, or Morgana, was not always thought of as King Arthur's sister, but this is probably from I say more recent, they're still very old, but more recent literary interpretations. He chose to have his sister Morgana at his side to have his wounds healed and his energy renewed. When modern folk dream of Avalon, we know it on a profound level as a place where the healing arts were taught and practiced with a great level of expertise and reverence. Perhaps some priestesses were midwives or helped women to conceive much wanted children, while others helped ease the pain of those who were ready to leave this world. Perhaps some created healing remedies with local herbs to prevent sickness or to attend to wounded soldiers. Yet others healed with vibrational essences and energetic medicine. But whatever the particular skills of each priestess may have been, they would have all known where on their island to find the medicinal plants that they needed and would see those plants as allies with whom they were in relationship. And that right there is the cornerstone of any good herbalism practice. The priestesses reflected the gentle comfort of the sacred land that they walked upon, a land that provided everything they needed, as the legend has it, with sacred springs, orchards, and a great hill shaped like the goddess herself. And again, if you're an Avalon newbie, I'm referring to the Glastonbury tour, which, when looked at from the side, can be seen as a feminine or goddess figure sort of reclining and resting. And when you look at the tour from like an overview, right? So from a drone photo, it kind of looks like a vulva, honestly. So it has a reflective feminine shape, regardless of where you're looking at it from. Of course, the tower or the apex of the hill can be seen as the masculine. So again, we have both represented in one place. And most importantly, Avalon was where you traveled to be healed, renewed, or reborn. I was going to say something earlier. Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that Avalon to me is like the OG Hogwarts before there was Hogwarts. I think it was probably the fantasy mystery school that everyone wished they could go to in real life before, before we had the Harry Potter universe. So, I think that modern, not just women, honestly, and even, you know, I don't want to go too far off track, but I now believe that there also probably was a corresponding druidic group or brotherhood of Avalon. But what we know from the legends and the literature was that it was an isle of women, and that there were actually other isles of women or priestesses in different places around what is now the land of the Celts. So it was this place of magic, yes, but also healing. And I don't go into this in this lesson, but I've always found it fascinating when we're talking about Morgan Le Fay, who was said to be sort of like the chief of nine sisters and the leader of Avalon, and sort of maybe you could even see her as the goddess of that land. That in the literary examples, right, she is a sorceress and can use magic to do all sorts of things. But like there's still examples of her using actual salves and tinctures and ointments and actual herbal remedies to heal people. Yeah, she probably put her magic into it, but it's like, okay, why didn't she just heal that night by waving a wand? That's not how it worked. She still worked with the plants and she still actually created remedies. So, Morgan Le Fay, even with all her magic, was still an herbalist, which I think is really important and really lovely. So, okay, so let's look ahead. By the way, my friends, I am going to try to keep this little class to about 40 minutes tops, and we're at almost 20 minutes now, only because it is snowing outside and it's starting to stick real fast. So I might have to leave and go home. I'm at my shop right now. So anyway, so here are the Hawthorn flowers. Here are what the flowers look like. And I wonder if I can zoom in. I took this photo when I was in Glastonbury in late April of 2023. So that's prime time for hawthorn blossoms and apple blossoms too, by the way, which look a lot like this, but with pink. They're really beautiful. So here's what your hawthorn blossom looks like. But it's interesting because did I put this correct? So these leaves don't look like hawthorn leaves to me now that I'm looking at this photo. So I'm like wondering what species this might be. I'm going to show you guys more hawthorn pictures so you can see what I mean, because most English hawthorn trees that I look at have different leaves. So that doesn't mean these aren't hawthorn blossoms. It just might be not Crataegus monogyna as in English hawthorn. So there are other species around the world. So I thought that this was the photo I took at Chalice Well, but now I'm like questioning myself. So I'll pull up some more photos in just a minute. But anyhow, so we're looking at Crataegus monogyna, which is sometimes called Crataegus levigata. And almost every part of this plant can be used medicinally, but most often, if you are shopping around for herbal supplies rather than having to forage for yourself, you're going to find the leaves and the berries the most. And both the leaves and the berries are the same medicinally as far as what they can do. But with the berries, you also have the option of creating a nice syrup or elixir or even oxymel from them. So I find that to be more fun. So I typically work with the berries, but hawthorn leaf is great too. So don't discount that. Hawthorn is in the sort of tree shrub category, and it looks the most like a crabapple tree, more so than like a rose bush or an actual apple tree. So it's the crabapple is its closest relative. We already talked about that she is a member of the Rosaceae, and we've got these beautiful blossoms, and they have a very distinct scent. Here is a little bit about the etymology of the word. Hawthorn's bright red berries. Let's see. Oh yeah. So of course, how could I skip over that? Okay, so hawthorn, right? If you've heard of hawthorn at all, as far as its herbal purposes, right? We know it best as a heart tonic. And it's almost very closely, almost a universal heart tonic, meaning that almost anyone can work with it. It's very safe and gentle, and at the same time, effective and powerful. So if you're coming from like a Western allopathic medicine mindset, you might feel like that's an oxymoron. Like, how could something be so safe and gentle with like almost no chance of side effects, and then also be so effective? This is the magic of plants, and it's really incredible. So really the only typical precaution with hawthorn is if you are already taking some other kind of medication for heart or blood pressure, because it is so effective. You don't want to be working with two things at the same time. Okay. So we can think of a couple examples of why hawthorn is a bit of a doctrine of signatures, meaning that the way that the plant looks reflects what it does for our bodies. But the easiest one to think about is the red berries, okay, which speaks to its power to balance and heal the cardiovascular system. But some people also think about the thorns, because the thorns of the hawthorn tree, some folks like to say, tells us that it helps us to heal the typical sharp stabbing pains of angina. So that's kind of another clue that the plant is giving us about how it can help us. So that's right here. Like I mentioned a minute ago, there are actually between 100 and 200 species of it in deciduous tree or shrub form. This talks a little bit about the thorns. I'm just going to kind of breeze through some of it because we don't have a ton of time. The leaves, okay, the leaves are typically, not always, but typically deeply lobed. So if you have a deeply lobed leaf, right? So let's say you have like your typical oval leaf shape. Well, a lobed leaf would mean that it goes near, 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 near all around, right? So it kind of moves in and out and in and out, which is different than like a toothed leaf, but you get the idea. So the lobes are a little softer. The flowers bloom right around Beltane, like we said, and then the berries show up later, like late summer, maybe early autumn. And so I would encourage all of you. I actually found an unexpected hawthorn tree when I was walking my dog around my neighborhood like a year or so ago, and I had, lived in the neighborhood for like 5 years at that point. So I was like, wait a second, are those the true thorns? Let me see. And then sure enough, later on, when the leaves and flowers start to show up, I don't think it's the same species that we would work with as herbalists, but you will probably find that you live somewhere where there's hawthorn. Um, yeah, there's lots of them in North America as well as Europe. Okay, so there are going to be some typical indications and contraindications for this plant. What does that mean? Okay, an indication is why might I want to work with this plant? What might I have going on in my body, both physically and emotionally, that I might need this support? And then a contraindication would be who should not use it, right? So we'll go here first since we just talked about this. Use of cardioactive drugs and or cardiac glycosides derived from the digitalis species, such as digoxin, digitoxin, and strophanthin, for as examples. Like I said a minute ago, this is because hawthorn might increase the efficacy of these drugs. So we wouldn't want that unless we were working with a naturopath or an integrative practitioner or an NMD, which is someone who has a naturopathic and a MD degree in one. And they're going to be the ones who know how to lower dosages and adjust things. Okay, because of its effect on the heart and blood pressure, it's also contraindicated with the use of Viagra or other similar drugs. You'll also want to avoid this during pregnancy. There are some, there can be exceptions to that, but in general, anything that is going to have an effect on the blood pressure or heart is to be avoided during pregnancy. And then you want to avoid ingesting the seeds because they're not going to make your stomach feel very good. So if you do decide to pick fresh hawthorn berries and eat them, they are kind of loaded with seeds. So, that's not the best way to ingest hawthorn. So, okay. Let's see. If anyone has any questions, you can type them in the chat, by the way. I am going to take a look at that in just a second. I want to talk a little bit about the magic of hawthorn as well, before we wrap up. And I am going to pull up some more photos for you guys too. I got to hang out with lots of hawthorn last summer as well when I was running the retreat. So I've got some good hawthorn photos. Okay, so the fun stuff. Okay, so we talked a little bit about hawthorn's medicine and a little bit about its connection to Avalon specifically, but there's actually a lot of other magic around it as well. So earlier I mentioned that I really like it as an Avalonian plant because it has strong associations with the Fae folk or fairy folk, as well as with boundaries in general. And that is kind of like, that right there is like a major Avalonian qualifier in my book, because if you think about Avalon as the Celtic otherworld, or one expression of the Celtic otherworld, right? It is also, at the same time as it is the otherworld, as in thought of as the land of the dead, this is where spirits, would go to rest after the human body passed away. It also at the same time is considered the fairy realm. And those things weren't like different. I mean, they are and they aren't. In terms of how the Celts viewed that was kind of the same thing. They would go into this other place. And in a way, it was also thought to be like, I don't want to compare it to limbo because it's not the same thing, but it was also sort of this place for the soul to rest before being reborn. So it wasn't considered like a final destination, in other words. But then it was also sort of believed that there were fae folk and fae queens and kings that like presided over Avalon and like, resided there full time. So also, in order to get to Avalon, you needed to part the mists, boundary, and cross over the water, another boundary. So this idea of being on this liminal place where you're in between two worlds is the essence of Avalon in so many ways. It's about crossing over. It's about death and rebirth in a lot of ways. I think I mentioned this somewhere in this handout, but hawthorn, the word, like the first part of the word, H-A-W, haw, was the word for hedge in an older form of English. So the hawthorn shrubs or trees were often planted as boundaries. So when they say the hedgerows, that often was hawthorn. So this was literally creating boundaries around, different parts of the land in general too. So before we had picket fences, we had hawthorns. So hawthorn is one of the trees that are part of the Celtic Agam, which is a tree alphabet consisting of 20 different symbols. And then also, these are two different things. It is, like I mentioned earlier, one of the 13 sacred trees that are part of Druid astrology or Celtic tree astrology. And again, I'm not 100% convinced that these are like historically accurate names, but you will see it a lot on the internet, which I would theorize comes from somewhere. So this speaks to its magical and spiritual significance in that part of the world. It was one of the trees revered by the Druids. Okay. Um, the sign of Hawthorn or the time period aligned with Hawthorn, according to these, roughly begins on May 13th and ends on June 9th. So it almost aligns with the sign of Gemini, but like kind of pushes it into Taurus a little bit. So this is still considered Beltane season. By the way, also the time of year between Beltane and summer solstice is the time most strongly associated with the fairies being out and about and being like, okay, the veil is thin, but not in the same way as it is at Samhain. Like now we're kind of like feeling the presence of the fae folk as the summer comes in and the earth really comes back to life. Um, the hawthorn tree is also very strongly associated with other Welsh goddesses and Celtic goddesses that sort of align with this May Queen archetype. So Guinevere has roots also in fairy lore. So it's spelled this way, looks more like Gwenifar in when we spell it the Welsh way, and of course Rhiannon and Blodeuwedd. Um, that's how that is pronounced. Yes, so those three are all sort of associated with being this like sort of May Queen or goddess of the land or goddess of sovereignty, in which one could not become king without being like joined with them or married to them first. It's also associated to some degree with Morgan Le Fay. We talked about, oh, there it is, the haw part, the hedgerow. I'm going to skip over this right and just we're going to go right here because here's a big juicy part. Okay, here's another major like check mark on the why is this plant Avalonian list, right? We have the holy thorn of Glastonbury. So here's where we start to get very early Christian mythology, early Christian lore, blending in with the pagan lore of the land. And there is a very well-known legend that, roughly 2,000 years plus ago, Joseph of Arimathea, who, according to some, was Jesus's uncle. I've also seen him mentioned as his cousin, but he was a pretty wealthy merchant. He was involved with the tin trade. So because of that, he would have known the route to get up to this part of what is now England. I do know that also Cornwall and that whole area was, a major destination point for those involved with tin and other mining trades. So it is said that Joseph of Arimathea traveled all the way up along his trade route to what is now Glastonbury, not long after the crucifixion. And as the story goes, he had a staff that was carved possibly from the same hawthorn tree that the crown of thorns that was put on Yeshua or Jesus Christ came from. And that he had that staff and struck it into the ground when he and the folks that he was traveling with, which is said to have been the 12 apostles and possibly Mary Magdalene, that they finally arrived in Glastonbury and they collapsed onto the ground in what is now known as Weary All Hill, because they were all weary and they were so grateful to finally be off that ship and be on solid ground. And they fell to the ground, and he struck his staff in, and as the legend goes, it took root and blossomed immediately. Um, and what's interesting about that is that the holy thorn, which still stands on Weary All Hill, albeit kind of barely stands due to various very sad incidences of uh, abuse and desecration on the tree. But the particular species of that tree is not native to what is now England. It was traced back to the Middle East. So that particular hawthorn on that particular hill in Glastonbury did come from somewhere, did come from the Middle East at some point. So there is some truth to this story because scientists have been able to tell us it's not the same as the hawthorns that grew in Avalon. And it's really fascinating because this particular hawthorn tree bloomed not only in the springtime around Beltane, but also right around winter solstice or Christmas time, and is thus believed to be a particularly holy tree. And for some, they see it as a symbol of harmony between pagan and Christian traditions. Excuse me. So this tree species is Crataegus monogyna biflora, which denotes that it flowers twice yearly. All right, so that's a major lesson in in Avalon lore. So that's an important part of kind of looking at the whole picture, right? Why it's a place in general thought to be, a place of religious unity, especially between Christian and pagan. As the stories go, Joseph of Arimathea and his companions, built the very first Christian church out of like wattle and daub, and worshiped there in peace for many, many years. The early Christians were different than what we know now, especially here in America. Not going to go down that rabbit hole, but okay. But let's talk more about modern times, right? So Hawthorn is also a really common, what I guess you could say ingredient for various forms of spellcraft. It's something that you might want to have around for all sorts of love spells, and healing spells and fairy spells. So again, we can use leaves, flowers, and or berries for any spells involving the heart. So it could be to become more open-hearted, to find new love. Maybe you want to protect your heart from, heartbreak, or you are going through a breakup or a time of heartbreak and you need to help process that grief and you need that support. That is, I've created remedies for folks often here in my shop who have just lost a pet or another loved one. So any kind of grief blend would really need to include hawthorn, but also with joyful things as well. I think sometimes our hearts, sometimes when we feel positive emotions, it can still be a bit heavy in a way. So if we are preparing for marriage or welcoming a new baby into the family, hawthorn would also be an excellent support plant for that, a plant ally. I also like to think of it as when you're wanting to align with your heart's desire or for even your soul's purpose, hawthorn would be an excellent plant to work with. And also, it's kind of interesting to note. So again, here we have that duality and that, alchemy of Avalon. Although the plant is associated with several goddesses, the tree itself is considered to be energetically masculine and also is an excellent magical plant for male virility. And also if a man wanted to attract a female lover, that, we have all these sort of old timey spells in like, there's a great book, oh my gosh, Traditional Witchcraft. No, that's not it. I have this book at home that's like old English witchcraft spells, and it's really cool. I can't think of the title, but if I remember, I'll post it in the comments when I post this video. So yeah, we have some, really interesting lore. I think that kind of ties in with the typical, ways that folks celebrate Beltane. So it makes sense that hawthorn would be a really go-to plant for just attraction and romantic spells in general. Okay, and then for protection, so it's got your back. Hawthorn is wonderful for protection in general, especially for the protection of the small and vulnerable. I really like to put out hawthorn berries as a fey offering. I also really like hawthorn combined with nettles. I mean, if you have a hawthorn tree, of course, you know, if you're doing a spell, you can use the thorns. We're obviously not going to use those for medicine purposes, but if you need a boundary spell and you can get the thorns of the hawthorn tree, work with those. Yeah. But combining it with nettles is a wonderful way to encourage healthy boundaries. You can make yourself like a nice little, what they call sometimes a mojo pouch or a talisman pouch, a little spell bag that you can carry on your person all day to encourage healthy boundaries, to help enforce boundaries. And even if you need to go a little bit on the magical offensive and give a little energetic jab or back the hell off kind of magical boost to those who might breach those boundaries. Okay, and finally, my friends, making medicine with hawthorn. It's very easy because hawthorn is effective in a lot of different, in all, you know, almost any, I'm going to say any. Hawthorn is effective in any menstruum or solvent. Okay, so when we're making herbal medicine, the actual plant material is called the mark, and the solvent is called the menstruum. So whatever we're infusing into. I mean, I guess I wouldn't think to use hawthorn topically in an oil infusion, like in a salve, but you also kind of could, because if you wanted to put it into some kind of like make an oil infusion that would then be used as part of like a lip balm or some kind of lotion that had like fairy lover vibes, I'd be here for that. So I'm gonna say, yeah, you could also do it that way. But typically hawthorn shows up in tinctures, in teas, and in syrups, elixirs, and oxymels, which is, if you don't know what all three of those things are, that's something that we do talk about in the Herbs of Avalon course. But here are some ideas. So if you've got hawthorn leaf or berry, you could blend that beautifully with some rose petals and maybe with linden or even tulsi, which is holy basil. And that would be a beautiful heart-supporting tea blend. And that could be used in spellcraft as well, if you like tea witchery like I do. But like I mentioned earlier, I really love doing hawthorn infused honeys and creating herbal syrups or elixirs or oxymel. And oxymel means that you've got typically apple cider vinegar, but technically it could be any kind of vinegar would make something an oxymel. So, you know, I don't have the time or space today to go through the instructions and do a demo of that, but it's actually a lot like making elderberry syrup. So you've got, let's say, your hawthorn berries, probably dried, most likely, is what you're going to be able to get. And then you'll start to simmer those in water. You're going to decoct those. And but what I've also done in the past, which actually worked pretty well, is so you can make a syrup by combining like that decoction with honey. But what I did with my retreat attendees last summer when we made medicines in Glastonbury together is that we took dried hawthorn and we had the berries whole, and we first kind of took a minute and put them into a food processor just to break them up a little bit. And then we infused those using the slow, low heat method with a double boiler setup into just directly into some honey. And we also had a honey infusion of rose petals as well. And so then we combined the hawthorn and rose infused honey. This takes a couple hours to do. When you strain it out, right, you strain out the mark or the plant material, really, really squeeze it out. You'll get like a nice sort of reddish pink colored honey out of it if you're using both the rose and the hawthorn. And then you can combine that with some I wouldn't say 50-50, but some people do like more of a vinegar taste. I would say maybe 25 to 30% apple cider vinegar to, 60 to 75% of your infused honey, and combine that together. And the vinegar will not only be excellent for your joints and for your health in general, but also helps to preserve the honey itself. You combine that into a nice bottle, shake it up, and you've got an Avalonian oxymel, which is just really fun to say. So, so I encourage everybody to play with Hawthorn, um, no matter what you do, especially as spring comes along. It's a really great way to connect with the energies of Beltane and summer solstice and Avalon in general. All right, my friends. So I am going to pop the link to my class in the chat. Ooh, copy and paste. Thank you. Boom. All right, so we're going to stop sharing and I'm going to pop the link. Ooh, Saba shared something earlier about in Iran, which is where her family hails from, I think. Nope, is that right? Yes. The flowers are pink. The hawthorn flowers are pink. Oh my God, gorgeous. And the fresh hawthorn berries are delish. Yeah. They're rich in vitamin C too, which is really cool. Okay, so here is the website for my um, 9-month online course. Sorry, it didn't look right for a moment, but it is. And I also wanted to quickly share what the website looks like and also show you guys the retreat website real quick because there are a couple spots left on that. So while I am pulling that up, we can take a couple minutes. I would imagine, based on who is here in real life with me now, that you guys probably don't have a lot of questions because you're already smarty pantses about this. But feel free, though, to share about if you have a little 30-second or 1-minute thing you want to share, Saba or Miranda, about Hawthorn and Avalon. Please feel free.
Um, okay. Well, I do work with Hawthorn a lot, and I do combine Hawthorn with Rose a lot. I think that that's incredibly Avalonian, and like you said, incredibly fairy, which I'm all for. And the one thing I kept thinking about as you were talking is that the hawthorn being considered masculine as a tree is in Welsh lore because I have read that Isbadden, I'm trying to say that right,
Hmm.
the father of Olwen, is his name means hawthorn.
Hmm.
And he's the one,
Olwen.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, and he's the one who
Yeah.
takes up Pollock, and eventually, of course, he wins Owen's hand. So
Yes.
that's really interesting. Plus, then there's that overlay with the May Queen energy because Credolad and being fought over every Beltane also appears in the same story.
Oh, awesome. Now, you might know if you can share with anybody who's watching this. Do you remember? I'm assuming that's part of the Mabinogion. Do you remember what branch in case people wanted to look that up? Or is
Um,
that?
yes, it's in the Mabinogion, but the title of the story is How Kolic Won Olwen. It is
Yes.
not in a branch because there's four branches
Right.
and there's several extra stories. And
Extra stories. That's right. Yes. Cool, cool, cool. Yes. Thank you. I love that. Yeah. Hawthorn, it's showing up whether you like it or not. Very cool. All right, my friends. So here is, for those watching the replay, this is um, the landing page for the Herbs of Avalon 9-month course. Today, so it's Friday, February 20th. Today was supposed to be the last day of the early bird pricing, but I'm thinking I might extend that at least another day or two, only because I realized also that for a lot of people, so my daughter is on a different school schedule than most folks are now. So she's not on break, but a lot of people have been away this week because it's usually winter break and it's President's Week. So I know that a lot of folks haven't been like as much checking email and social media and stuff. So for that reason, I might give it a couple more days. But if you are interested, this is where you want to go and check out to find more information about what's included in the class. But we meet for 2 live classes every month, and then there's like tons of downloadable guidebooks, and there's always bonus material. And I've been adding a few plants to the course every single year since I've started it. So the number of plants that we study is increased a lot. Um, and then there's more info about me and yay, I have training and experience and I'm a practicing herbalist. So yay. And also have done a lot of work as I would say I call myself more of a priestess of Morgan Le Fay than just a priestess of Avalon, but either one is just wonderful for me. So yeah, there is also a separate website for the retreat. So the retreat, of course, is not required if you are taking the course, but it is a wonderful way to enhance your experience as a fellow healer of Avalon. So this year, the retreat runs just after summer solstice from June 25th to the 30th in Glastonbury, UK. It is definitely not too late to get, to get a good flight over there if you're coming from America. And I mean, this is not an official recommendation, and I'm knocking on wood as I say it, but passport processing times aren't bad right now. So if you don't have a passport for travel yet, that may not be a deal breaker if this is something that you do want to do. Right now, yeah, for those who enroll in the, excuse me, not enroll, I'm using class lingo, who register for the retreat, there are still a couple of options for if you want there to be room and board included and you stay in the Covenstead, or you can also do like an a la carte and find your own accommodations, or maybe you know someone in Glastonbury and you want to come stay with them, you can still do the retreat. So yeah. All right, my friends, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing and I'm going to, yes, that's right, you did, Saba. I just saw the chat. Yeah, Saba, yeah, would have joined us in Avalon last summer. So I had extra Hawthorn oxymels and I had to mail her one because I wanted her to have it. And yeah, I ran out of mine like a month ago or something, and I'm going to make more at home. But yeah, it was truly magical. We got to make those elixirs together, or excuse me, oxymels together as a group, and then we kind of brought them and charged them with the energy of the holy thorn. We all made a circle around the holy thorn and sent it love because, like I said, it has been abused. And it sent us a lot of love back, I have to say. So it was a really potent experience. So, all right, I have got to wrap up. The snow is sticking, and I think I should start to make my way home soon. But thank you so much for joining me today, for those who came in person and for those watching the replay. You can also email me info@alchemyofAvalontea.com if you've got questions. And then I'll pop the retreat website in the comments as well. Herbs of Avalon retreat.com if you want to check that out. All right, my friends. So I hope that you go forth in Hawthorn in your life, and I will see everybody very soon. Blessings.
Blessings.